Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. This is the last time I'm doing this introduction. I'm sorry if this is your 10th time hearing it. You can go take like a nice little break during this 2 to 3 minute introduction. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Jackie Brenner, a pre-med student who has enjoyed meeting other STEM students from around the world through my TikTok and Discord STEM Potential. It has been almost a year now since we started STEM Potential, which is an online Discord that provides a network for all students to share their unique perspectives from diverse backgrounds and create strong connections and more. With over 12,000 students from over 105 different countries, Discord members can act as mentors and mentees as they progress along the stages of their education while also finding friends with common interests. I would like to give a special shout out to the members of the STEM Potential team for working so hard to help put this weekend together. I couldn't do it without them. I created these STEM Potential webinars in order to combat the lack of mentorship and representation that I noticed in STEM fields. Lastly, I want to introduce Ashini. She is the Vice President of STEM Potential, who I met through the 7-year BSMD program at Penn State in Jefferson, and is now a first-year medical student. I could not embark on this journey without her. I feel so fortunate and proud to have her here as my best friend. We will both be moderating this session, as you all know. She'll be doing part 3 of this session. Please note that today we are sharing students' opinions and advice about the medical school admissions process. We have not received any direct information from admissions departments, nor are we an official accredited business in this space. This session will be highlighting 4 medical students that have unique perspectives and stories on how they were accepted into medical school. Now, I want to start off by allowing each panelist to give a 2 to 3 minute introduction. And maybe Lyra, you can start us off.
Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here. As Jackie just said, my name is Lyra Morena, and I'm a first-year medical student at Washington University in St. Louis. I just embarked on this journey and began in the MD PhD or MSCP program here. For a little bit about me, I'm originally from a small city in Southeastern Europe called Prizren in Kosovo. And I basically grew up throughout Europe and Africa before moving to the US in high school, where I then attended university at the University of Maryland. I studied cell biology and economics, and then I ended up doing research for 2 years at the NIH before applying to medical school. So I do have a little bit of the experience of taking some time off after school before starting medical school. So if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to talk more about it. As I mentioned, I am also pursuing a PhD on top of my medical studies. So I'm really interested in cancer immunology research. And I honestly was doing research in many different fields before I decided to pursue this route. I did a little bit of mosquito research, a little bit of autophagy research, which is more like molecular cell biology, some botany research. I just kind of like wherever my opportunities took me, I was really open-minded about learning more and exploring. And I think that's super important. So I'm happy to talk about that more if anyone's interested in pursuing research experiences for medical school. But yeah, I kind of ended up narrowing down my focus to cancer immunology, which is what I want to do for my PhD. And Washcu is a really great school for that because they have many labs that are working on like the tumor microenvironment and kind of how to manipulate our immune system to make immunotherapies. And that's what I'm looking forward to doing in my career.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to have you here today. And everyone, as you can see on her little name bar, follow her on Instagram. She has amazing advice that gets me through my daily life. Next up, maybe Jana. You can go next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jana Reese. I'm also an M1 at Washcu and also in the MSCP program with Lyra. I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina, and went to school at the University of South Carolina. I was a biochem major there, and ever since like starting undergrad, I knew I wanted to do research. I started on like the pre-med track a little bit later, probably my junior year. Also took a year off and was at NIH. My background, like I said, I was a biochem major, so I do a lot of protein biochemistry, apply to like virology and vaccine development. And I think that's what I want to do my PhD in as well. I clinically am really interested in pathology and sort of all of the like diagnostics that goes into that. And I have 2 guinea pigs that are like the light of my life. So I spend a lot of time with them outside of class. I always have to give them a shout out.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Next up, Ahmed.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Ahmed. I'm also an M1 at Washcu. I was born in Alexandria, Egypt, but I grew up in the suburbs of Seattle. I went to Washcu for undergrad. I majored in neuroscience with a minor in computer science. I, unlike the other two members that have introduced themselves, did not like research. And so I did very little research. So if you want to hear about how little you have to do research, you could ask me questions. I majored in neuroscience and minored in computer science, and I did not take a gap year. So I went straight through. And yeah, now I'm an M1.
Awesome. And last but not least, Dante.
Hi, everyone. My name's Dante. I'm a M1 here at WashU in the MD program. I grew up in a small town outside of Boston called Hanover. And then I went to undergrad at a tiny school in DC called the Catholic University of America, like only 3,000 students, very small, where I majored in biology and neuroscience. I took a gap year before coming to medical school and did a year of service working at a medical respite facility in Washington, D.C. for men experiencing homelessness. And clinically, kind of like my whole path towards medical school, I've been interested in doing something within pediatrics. Not sure entirely what yet, but a lot of my experiences leading up to medical school have involved working with kids in some capacity. And so I can talk about that. And then also like specifically doing like a year of service as a gap year as a potential option. Great to meet all of you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for those introductions. So jumping right into part one, talking specifically about why you decided to go to WashU. Specifically for Jana and Lyra, I wanted to ask, why'd you decide to pursue MD PhD? And on top of that, what do you think is the typical amount of research you need in undergrad or if you have to take a gap year in order to apply MD PhD? Maybe Lyra, you can start us off.
Sure. So I'm just going to hit a couple of the things you mentioned because there's a lot to cover there. So maybe me and Jana can cover a little bit of different parts of your questions. But to start off, I was really interested in doing MD PhD, but I didn't take the decision lightly. Basically near the end of college, I knew I liked research because I had been in a couple of different research labs, but I hadn't really explored medicine yet. And so I came at it from like, I definitely know I want to do a PhD, but I don't know if I want to be a medical doctor kind of perspective. So I started to shadow and kind of expose myself to the clinical world, which can be really intimidating. And if anyone out here feels like nervous going into the hospital for the first time, I totally feel that because it's like medicine is such a noble profession. And I just regard it so highly that I felt like kind of scared to walk into that space and see like life and death and everything in between. But it is absolutely incredible, and seeing the way that physicians were there for people made me really want to serve as a physician too, and not only a researcher. And so that's kind of how I fell in love with this marriage between research and medicine, and kind of working at the forefront of developing science specifically with the aim of improving either how we understand or diagnose a disease or treat or cure it. And so that's what led me to pursue the MD PhD. That being said, there are physicians out there who obtain their MD and go on to become amazing researchers and do significantly impact the treatments we have out there. But if you want to get into the details of it, a lot of these individuals have to have research training either at the end of their medical training through like a more in-depth research focused residency or fellowship specifically. Whereas I really wanted that structure of learning how to think critically and answer scientific questions during my medical / graduate school years. And I think Jackie, you asked a little bit about gap years. I'm sorry if I forgot the question.
I think a common question is how much research do you really need to have on your application to be sufficient to like apply MD PhD?
Yeah, so nobody ever gives you an exact answer to that, but I believe I was told like you should have close to 1,000 hours to be a competitive MD PhD applicant. And Jana, definitely like share if you have any idea, like if you've heard something different. But from my personal experience, I applied with like thousands and thousands of hours, but I think that's because I absolutely love research. I think you can get into an MD PhD program without having that many hours, but I think like a general ballpark of close to 1,000 hours is really important because they want to make sure that you want to also significantly spend time doing research. I think you have to like sell that part extra hard.
Well, thank you. Maybe Jana, you can take over.
Yeah. I totally agree with what Lyra said. I think 1,000 hours is sort of like the minimum. The advice that I heard was that you want to be able to show that like you have seriously considered what a research career is like, and part of that is seeing like not just the joys of research and the breakthroughs that you can make, but also really struggling. And like 1,000 hours ish is probably the point at which like you will have had some significant setbacks in your research, and you can talk about that as well. Really, I think admissions people just want to know that like you understand what you're getting into with a PhD. For me, as for like why I wanted to do an MD PhD, a lot like Lyra, I always knew I wanted to do research. And something that I noticed relatively early on was that like the breakthroughs that you make in the lab don't directly translate into like improved patient outcomes. And being able to do sort of that long-term, R&D development type stuff while also using sort of the current technologies and like understanding we have of, anatomy, physiology to help patients like in the present was something that I really liked. I liked having that like both the short-term and the long-term impact.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Maybe we can move to Dante and Ahmed for just why you chose WashU and maybe what other extracurriculars you're involved in.
Yeah. So for me, when you're applying to medical school, a lot of them will have like student panels as a part of the admission process where they'll have current students like do a Zoom session like this and talk about their experiences at the university. And when I came to the ones for WashU, it just felt like the students were being very authentic and very genuine with how much they actually loved WashU, which like wasn't something that I got at every medical, like all the medical schools, like the students are so gracious for giving their time and like coming to speak to the applicants. But at WashU, it was just definitely a different sense of like, I could tell that they were being genuine when they talked about how much they loved the school and specifically how much they loved the community at WashU, which since being here is like the most wonderful thing. We have such an incredible class and everyone helps each other out, shares study resources and everything. It's incredible. So that was a huge factor for me because like my community and the support network that I had in undergrad was like the thing that got me through undergrad, and I knew that I needed a strong support network in medical school too. Some things more specific to WashU is I'm really interested in eventually like doing academic medicine at a children's hospital, and WashU is incredibly respected within academic medicine, and there are a lot of people at St. Louis Children's that I can potentially work with who are, bigger names inside of pediatrics and all of that, because I see myself working in academic medicine eventually.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't want to echo too much of what Dante said, and I totally agree with everything he said. And I think I saw a question asking about the culture at WashU. So I'm like the biggest WashU fanboy you will ever meet in your entire life, because I went here for undergrad and I had a phenomenal time, and I applied here for medical school and I had an even better time. And the reason just stems from the people and the faculty. Like when I was applying and like going through an interview cycle with other schools, I would reach out to the faculty and they would be really like unhelpful, or even the administration would just be relatively unhelpful. With WashU, I would get responses within a day, and they would be genuinely like, I felt like they actually cared about my well-being, to the point where the person that interviewed me, I had a conversation with her choosing. I was like, I'm trying to choose between this school and this school, and it was like WashU and University of Washington. And she was like, well, let's go through your priorities. And we went through priorities, and she was like, I can see why I would pick University of Washington. And I was like, see, I genuinely believe that you care about my well-being. I try to have the same conversation with the University of Washington, not to bring down University of Washington's phenomenal school and phenomenal program. I tried to have the same conversation with University of Washington. It just did not go that well at all. They couldn't even, like, she was like, yeah, we can meet. And it was like after the decision date. So I was like, this is completely useless. Like, that doesn't mean no good. But just like the culture at WashU is just so phenomenal. And the students are super welcoming. The faculty is super welcoming. And then another really specific aspect to WashU is the curriculum has this thing. So my big thing in undergrad was like intersection of like healthcare and computer science and technology. And WashU has like these 4 different pathways that you can explore if you're not MSDP. where and one of them is like an innovation pathway, and that's something that appealed to me, which is something that I like worked on as like a project, and so I could see myself choosing that pathway. So another reason why I ended up choosing WashU.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I won't tell University of Washington anything you said. But one quick
No,
question.
you can tell them. I want them to know.
Oh, okay. Okay, one thing I wanted to address before we move specifically into more application stuff is someone asked, did either of you have publications prior to applying to MD PhD? If so, how many?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. I had 0 publications, and I was very nervous about that because there are so many people who do. And that just goes to show that if you have significant research experience and you can show it, like I had a lot of poster presentations, I defended an undergraduate thesis, and there was just like clear evidence throughout my application and throughout my interviews, throughout my essays, that like I spent a lot of time doing research in these labs and I care a lot about it and I can talk about it. And so I think schools who value that will accept you no matter what. But of course, if you are able to publish, definitely go for it. It's something that I'm constantly working on. I'm currently working on publishing my work from my gap years, but it just takes a long time to get it published. So like I was accepted and I'm continuing to write that paper during medical school. But Jana, you might have something more to add.
I had one second author paper that got published during the application cycle. I have no idea how that impacted my like admissions or whether it did or not. I think it's more like Lyra said about showing like that you have dedication to research over, you know, a specific number of publications or anything like that.
Can I add something real quick, actually? I specifically ended up having an interview with the director of the MSCP program at WashU, and we talked briefly about this, and he was saying, I think it's really important for you to show that you took initiative in your projects in the lab, and it's more important to be able to like to talk about the work and understand it than to be on like a lot of papers and not understand. So like there are situations where you might be in a really big lab, and I'm not saying like I don't commend you for being on a big publication, but if you are on a publication like that, be very careful and make sure you understand the work fully so that when you do go to those interviews or talk about in your application, you know what you're talking about, because I can understand it's hard to like fully grasp big projects and big labs as well. Like you can have the opposite situation happen.
That's great advice. So now moving more towards application, especially personal statement. I wanted to ask, is there a specific part of your background or upbringing that was important to bring up on your application that you didn't realize was important until recently? Maybe Dante, you can start with that one.
Yeah, totally. I think like the application process it's long and it's hard, but I also like definitely thought it was cool because it was a way of like reflecting about like your whole life that I had never really done before up until that point. And in reflecting about like my path towards medicine, I kind of realized that I've been working with kids essentially my whole life. And so I kind of talked about that and how that's been a huge part of my life like throughout, and that has, you know, led me towards wanting to do something within pediatrics. And so I think the process of like writing the personal statement was really cool because it like helped me realize that I've had this passion like my whole life, because otherwise like I was like, oh, like, you know, I came into medicine kind of late. Like I didn't decide I wanted to do medicine until my freshman year of college, like, which is later than some people. And so it was cool, like being able to weave that thread. And it definitely is, you know, I feel like they want you to be able to just like talk authentically about yourself and talk about your story. Like that is like one of my biggest pieces of advice for the personal statement is like, don't embellish, don't like make stuff up, like just talk about you. And they just want to learn about you and your life story and who you are. But yeah, so specifically to answer the question, it was cool to see that like I've had this passion like the whole time, and then that was what I kind of used to like weave the story through my personal statement.
Awesome, thank you. Maybe Lyra, if you want to follow.
Sure. So it's kind of hard to answer the question because the way I wrote my personal statement was kind of a chronicle chronological order of my life, but I kind of just picked the highlights. And I will say, like, a dominant theme of my whole application was the fact that I grew up always loving science, and over time it developed into this love for MD, PhD, and like research, and like I'm so obsessed with it that I started an Instagram, obviously. But I think something that I think would surprise me if I would go back to like the first paragraph of my personal statement was talking about how much my parents inspired me and made me who I am today. And so it wasn't like obviously the main focus of my entire application, but just kind of starting off with like where I'm from and why I ended up moving, and like how my dad's work in humanitarian aid, like kind of maybe like thinking back, like Dante said, reflecting makes you realize like, oh, that obviously shaped what I felt like what matters. And so that's shaped my passion for service and like helping people in the medical sphere. So I think it is beautiful in that sense that the application process makes you reflect a lot on what mattered to you growing up and how that shaped you into who you are today. And maybe you didn't realize all those years, but I think that's a pretty cool part of the process.
And I guess a follow-up question to that is, and this has come up a lot as well, is how much do you focus on, experiences you've had, like, starting the Instagram, based on like, what your passions are versus focusing on your background and your family? Like, how do you kind of balance that in the personal statement?
Are you asking me specifically?
Yeah.
So I didn't talk about my Instagram in my personal statement, and I know that this is like a big debate in the like pre-med Instagram social media community if you want to talk about it in your application or not. I mentioned it in one of my 15 activities in like the hobbies one, and I listed like, oh, hiking, Instagram, like different things. I understand that if like your Instagram is also a big blog or like a business or something like STEM potential, I might have like made it a bigger part of my application. But in terms of, I think the way I framed my Instagram life is STEM outreach, because it is really what it started from. I, like you said, love to host panels like this because I feel like there's a strong need for sharing information. And I felt like when I started exploring if I want to do MD PhD, there were a lot of resources from MD applicants, but really not as many for MD PhD applicants. So it was up to me to like reach out to people one-on-one and figure it out. And everybody in the MD PhD community is like so welcoming and friendly, and just like they're like, yes, come and do it. There's like not that many of us, which is awesome. But I did want to consolidate it and put it out there and like talk more about it, because I didn't even know that MD PhD was a thing until like end of college when somebody just brought it up to me. So that's kind of how I feel about this whole thing, but I didn't emphasize it a ton in my application just because it was something that I started later on.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Maybe Ahmed, you can go next.
Yeah, so I also focused a lot on my background, and for me, my background, besides obviously immigrating here, was also that like I grew up in an area that was filled with like computer science. Like everyone does computer science. It's like the tried and true path. And my family did not want me to do medicine. I was doing everything in my power to not want to do medicine. Like I went into undergrad, I was like, I don't want to be a doctor. Being a doctor, I don't know if I want that. And like we can talk about like the challenges aspect probably later, but there were like so many obstacles. I'm like, yeah, see, this is clearly a sign from the universe that I should not go into medical school and I should just become a programmer instead. But every time I tried to go back to it, I found myself like going to medicine. And that's kind of what I talked about in my personal statement, where it's like I tried so many different things throughout undergrad and while growing up. And yet the only thing that I really wanted to do was be a physician. And that's how I knew that's what I wanted to do. And that's kind of what you want to talk about in your personal statement, in my opinion, especially is like the why medicine question. And it's like, what experiences have you had and what has shown you that this is actually the career for you? Because it's really easy for everyone to be like, yeah, I want to be a physician. But if you've never tried to be a physician, obviously, like I can't just go out and like perform surgery because you can't, but you can see what physicians do and you can see what other people do. And like through those experiences, you can be like, yeah, because of XYZ things, this is why I think I want to be a physician. And that's kind of like the point of your personal statement, I think, while also giving obviously your background and who you are. But I think that's kind of the best way to summarize how I approach my personal statement.
Thank you. And last but not least, Jana.
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I'm answering
Oh,
correctly.
Is there a specific part of your background or upbringing that was important to bring up on your application that you didn't realize was important until recently?
So something I wrote about on my secondaries, I think most was the fact that like I'm a German immigrant. I moved to the States when I was 2. And so I talked a little bit about like that like sort of bicultural upbringing. And I didn't I then like brought that up during or it was brought up during my interview, and we were talking about how like we as people I think tend to like focus on one aspect of someone's identity and then like filter everything else through that. And I think that's something that we at WashU, or that WashU has been trying to like move away from in medicine, of like labeling patients as like, this is the diabetic patient, this is the heart failure patient, and saying, no, like this is, you know, Mr. Jones and his family. And I did not realize how like important that was when I was like just writing that in my personal statement. And now like seeing that, or in my secondaries, excuse me, like seeing those conversations that I wrote about being brought up in medicine is really exciting for me. Yeah.
That's great advice. Maybe we can move into next off of what Ahmed was saying. What obstacles did you face in your path to medical school and how did you overcome them? Maybe Ahmed, you could take that one first.
Yeah, sure. So the obstacles I faced, number one was I didn't really have any mentors that had went through this, so I had no idea anything, like how like medical school, when to take the Mcat, what the application was like. I had no idea. I had to like basically kind of figure that all out by myself and reach out to people. So that was like my first main obstacle. My second main obstacle, like I said, is that when you go to a school like WashU for undergrad, everyone is pre-med. Like literally every single person in that entire school is pre-med. And so they all have like this thing where like, oh, I just started doing research here. I just started doing blah, 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 blah. And I was like, okay, well, so everyone was doing research. I guess I have to try and do research too. And so I guess someone asked this in the Q&A, but like I did one summer of research and I did it at a pharmaceutical company. So I don't know, some people have their qualms about pharmaceutical companies, which is fine. But I did my research at a pharmaceutical company for a summer. And I was like, yeah, this absolutely sucks. And I will never do this ever again. And that was like, that's my perspective on this. And all of a sudden I was like, what? You have to have so many hours of research. And I was like, dude, I don't want to do this. So I decided to like change my focus and focus on like what I actually cared about and what I was passionate about. And so I got some flack for it because people didn't think I was going to get in. And then I took my Mcat the first time, did not score very well. I actually did lower than my diagnostic, which is still blows my mind to this day because what was I doing for 3 months? But and then I was like, yep, that's it. I was like super sad for 2 or 3 weeks. And then I just was like, okay, I guess I have to take it again. And taking it again was like a super huge like mental thing to overcome. Luckily it went well the second time. But yeah, those are kind of like the challenges that you face. And thing is like you learn from those challenges and you also learn to talk about those challenges during interviews and you learn how to frame how you grown from them. So it ends up being like, I remember also like, again, WashU, super big pre-med place, like, oh my goodness, you're taking your Mcat twice. And I was like, yeah. And when I talked about my interview, they're like, oh, what did you change? And they would be so like genuinely curious and like wondering how I improved. And to them, that was like a bigger plus than, you know, taking it twice wasn't a big deal. It was like, oh, the fact that you improved the second time and you saw a mistake that you made and you learned from it. And that is much more valuable than just necessarily just killing it the first time and be like, yeah, I'm the greatest or something. Yeah.
Well, I think you're definitely giving many kids solace in terms of talking about the Mcat because it's definitely one of the biggest questions you get all the time. So thank you for sharing. Maybe Dante, you're next.
Yeah, totally. I kind of had the same problem in an opposite way. So I also had like 0 mentors coming into this whole process, but more of as a product of being at like a tiny school where there were maybe 10, 20 pre-meds per year. And there was one pre-med advisor and she was not a physician. Wonderful, wonderful, but she wasn't a physician. She was just like a professor in the biology department, so didn't have as deep of an understanding of the whole process. So a lot of my own discovery about like what I would need to accomplish to get into medical school. And like Ahmed said, like when to take the Mcat, like what activities and experiences should I be doing? That was kind of all left to me to like try to figure out like online and all of that. So that was probably one of the larger obstacles. And then also just like reassuring myself like throughout the whole application cycle of like major imposter syndrome the whole time, because like I'm coming from this tiny school that like at every interview day people are like, where? And so like for those of you who might be at tinier schools, like it is definitely possible, like you can do it. It is 100% achievable. And know that you are just as qualified like as all the people coming from like the big name schools as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing and being cognizant of the time. I know we started a little late, so maybe if it's okay with you guys, we can go over a little bit, but I wanted to move into more experiences like the 15 on your application. So a lot of times students believe that you have to cover the big three: research, clinical experience, and shadowing, which is definitely important to try and get exposure. But I think the most important experiences are those that really show your personality and that aren't necessarily medically related. So I was wondering if each of you can expand on this and describe one experience that wasn't medically related, but that you believe was integral to your personal growth and application process. And with this question becomes, the idea that I want to be cognizant that not all students have access to medically related experiences. So I want to highlight how, any of the experiences you guys talk about really describing not only what it was and how you got that opportunity, but then how you tied it back in your application to like, this will make me a better physician, kind of what they all ask for. Maybe Lyra, you can start us off.
I love this question because something that I also share a lot on my Instagram when I talked about the 15 activities section is how for your top three most important, it's important to choose like, at least as an MD PhD applicant, like a research opportunity, a clinical opportunity, and then one that's neither. Because for me, my third one was being an RA or a resident assistant. And I actually realized while writing a lot of my personal statement and secondary essays that this was such a big part of me deciding or seeing in myself that I want to be a physician and serve people like in their time of greatest need. Because as an RA, if your school doesn't have RAs or you're in a country that doesn't have RAs, basically the position of an RA is to live in the dorms and be there to help students, usually their freshman year, but it could be in later years in college. I was specifically in the freshman dorms for 2 years. And it was, first of all, super fun. I loved getting to know the students and like organizing fun activities with them. But also you are literally on duty as if it's the same terminology as being a physician. And sometimes you work like a 24-hour shift. You get to sleep, but you have like a phone that will go off. That's like your special RA phone. And if there's an emergency. And so like I had the opportunity to be there for my residents or the students on my floor when they had like, one of my residents ended up being diagnosed with leukemia. I had a resident who had an eating disorder who had to take time off of school and really just go and take care of herself and prioritize her well-being. And there was like a whole broad range of things that I was exposed to, but like one time one of my residents was having a panic attack and we just went outside and walked around for a couple of minutes. And all these instances, as terrible as they sound, like really, really allowed me to see that like it's something that I wanted to do and that it's 3 a.m. and I would rather be out there helping this person than I'm not like irritated that someone just woke me up at 3 a.m. to help them out. Like this is something that makes me feel like purposeful and is rewarding. And so I talked about that a lot in my application because as you can see, like there's such a strong parallel to being a doctor and like putting others first and like being able to kind of put aside your needs for someone else's. And I think that was a really beautiful part of being an RA. And I know Dante and I talked a little bit about this because like he was in the kind of resident life community or a little bit too.
Wow, well, thank you so much for that. That was an amazing story. Maybe Jana, you can go next.
Something that I talked a bit about in my actual application, and then I think interviewers were just like interested in, was being part of a like literary and oratory society at my university. So basically we would like write speeches and then present them and like analyze each other's arguments. So it was a little like hoity-toity. But mostly it was just us like learning how to think and like reason through things. And I really loved it because I love like philosophy and things like that. But I think a lot of like med school is like memorizing things, yes. But you don't always have, like, you're not, as a physician or as a med student, always going to know everything. And so having like, for me, having this experience and like learning how to think critically and like reason my way through things was really helpful. And I also just got to spend like time with like a lot of other really, really smart people and think about like politics and a lot of philosophy. We were really nerdy and talked a lot about like Kant and Aristotle and stuff. But I don't know where I was going with this. But yes, I think it was a really fun experience, something that I really loved, and so that's why I put it on my application. And it definitely like helps me in like class now when I'm like, wait, I don't know like which way is the blood flowing, and then I'm like, wait, no, like let me think through it. It's helpful, yeah.
Awesome. Maybe Ahmed, you can go next.
Yeah, so something that I did that wasn't clinically focused. I mentioned something that was like half clinically focused and half not in my bio. So if you guys really are interested, you can just read that. But something that I wasn't clinically focused at all was I worked at a summer camp teaching kids how to code. And at the same time, I was working at the YMCA and I was working at Jamba Juice for an entire summer. So there was no like medicine related progress at all for that entire summer. But it was really hard. And interestingly, in all my interviews, people cared more about the YMCA and the Jamba Juice job like experience than they did about any of like anything else that I did. Like they could not care less about, again, how much research I did. All they care like, oh my God, what was it like working at the YMCA and Jamba Juice? And I was like, well, I got really good at making mega mangoes and I'm really good at folding towels now. So that's kind of just like the kind of things that you do. And it's like the way you frame your narrative. And to me, it was like, I learned how to manage my time so well and manage so many responsibilities. When I was like busing from job to job, like day to day. And that's like a bigger like thing than just like doing something that you're not as passionate about. To me, those are things that I needed to do. And it just shows on how you like present that narrative.
Thank you. I think that's such great advice, just to echo what you said, like doing something you're passionate about, because ultimately like that's what it's going to come through no matter what. So mega mangoes. Dante, if you want to finish us off on this question.
Yeah, of course. Lyra gave us a little sneak peek. I love working with first year students. Oh my goodness. I was really involved in the orientation program at my university. And then my senior year, I was one of the 2 students in charge of running the orientation program there. So that included like the whole summer leading up to it, kind of similar to what Amma was just saying. I did nothing medically relevant that summer, and definitely got a lot of flack from it, from like advisors and stuff. But honestly, like the bulk of every single one of my interviews was talking about my experiences like running the orientation program, because they wanted to like hear about like that very like practical experience in like running an organization and the challenges with leadership and logistics and all of that sort of stuff. But then also just like working with first year students. And Lyra already did such a beautiful job of explaining it. I have very similar like experiences and stories, but oh my goodness, so close to my heart.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. And now I'm going to call Sheeny on, who's going to help finish off the session and talk about gap years and advice, etc. So Sheeny, take it away.
Yeah, so like Jackie said, I wanted to ask you all about whether or not you took a gap year. Like, what did you do during your gap year? How did that contribute to your application? And how did you kind of come to that decision of taking a gap year? And if you didn't take a gap year, how did you come to that decision? And like, what advice would you have for going straight through to MD or MD PhD? Lyra, if you want to start.
Sure. So since I talked a little bit about my gap years, I won't take too much time, but I ended up taking 2 gap years, and this was predominantly because I wasn't sure about applying to medical school until about my junior or senior year. So it came down to, should I take 1 gap year or 2, which means I would be applying throughout my senior year and then just take a year off to work. And I decided, it was even deciding 1 or 2 years, I like made such a big deal out of it. I had like a pros and cons list. Now I'm like, I don't know why I cared this much. Like retiring a year earlier is not that big of a deal. It was a good decision, I think, to take 2 years off, because then my first year I could really focus in the lab that I had joined and learn all the techniques. I was joining an immunology lab. I'd never done immunology research before, and there's just like such a steep learning curve. And I just had like no pressure of doing stuff outside of work. I would go into work, do research, and then like enjoy my life in the evenings, which I hadn't had the luxury of doing since I was born. And that was really fun. And then I started the application process the second year of my gap year, of my 2 gap years. And I thought that was cool too, because if you are considering doing your gap years at the NIH, they also have like a pre-med office there as well. And there's a lot of MD PhD applicants from the NIH. So they have a lot of like advisors that specifically can prepare you for the MD PhD. So I remember when I first started my gap years, I went and set up a meeting with them and basically had just like, even though my first year is kind of like a more relaxed, like I don't have to worry so much about all the pre-med things I need to do. What are a few things I could fill in the gaps for? And like one of the things for me was getting more clinical experience. I would like volunteer on weekends every once in a while in the clinical center or like at the children's inn. And so that was a good way to just keep adding to my application during my gap years without stressing about it so much. But I can't emphasize enough how much I am so glad I took my years off, because I just think it was really good for my personal growth. It was the first time in a long time that I had time to be like, oh, I'm bored. Who am I? Existential crisis. So like that was really important, I think, in being like, oh, actually, I do want to go to med school. Like I can't see myself doing anything else. Like I actually have time right now to think more about what else I could do, and I don't find those other things rewarding enough. Like I need to go back to school and get more training so I can do what I really, really want to do.
Yeah, it's definitely important. I know a lot of panelists in the previous sessions have talked a lot about how their gap year contributed to their personal growth, like you said. So it's seeming to be like a common theme. Dante, if you want to go next.
Yeah, totally. So I was pretty heavily involved with service at my university, mostly with Habitat for Humanity, which is an organization that helps build affordable housing for people who are experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity. And so through my experiences with that, I met a lot of people who did a year or multiple years of service following college. And before college, I didn't even know that that was something that people did, like take a whole year to just volunteer. And the more that I learned about it, the more that I discerned like whether that was something I wanted to do or not, the more that I realized that like that was definitely something that I wanted to do. And I obviously still wanted to be a physician as well. So really the only time for me to take a whole year to do service would be during a gap year. So I started looking into various programs and ended up deciding to do a year of service at the clinic that I worked at in Washington, D.C. with men experiencing homelessness. And it was a really amazing year and beautiful year and difficult year. And I grew so much and was really able to see a side of medicine that I probably won't see as much of as a physician, since I want to do pediatrics. Like working with adults was definitely very cool, because I also realized like, oh my goodness, I also kind of like working with adults too, which was something I hadn't really considered before. So I learned a lot, and the people that I met were wonderful, and the experience and like relationship building with the men at the clinic was the highlight of that year, and absolutely incredible.
That sounds like an amazing experience. Thank you for sharing. Ahmed, if you want to go next.
Yeah, sure. So I did not take a gap year, and my reasoning for it was, the first one is had basically decided that I was going to go into medical school, so I didn't really find too much for myself value in getting another year of just like, because I didn't have any plans to do anything, so I would have just like stayed at home. Probably realistically would have just like coded somewhere. But the one thing that I also thought about was, because I was during COVID when like I went for home for spring break and like never came back. That whole situation. So I felt like I got a gap year basically, because I was at home all the time, like just basically just a lot more relaxed, and my senior year was super relaxed. So I felt like I had a gap year. So in my eyes, I was gotten like the benefits of a gap year without actually taking a gap year. So for that reason, I decided to not take a gap year. I will say it's really easy to get burnt out. if you just kind of go straight through, if your like mentality isn't good. So just kind of keep that in mind. Like I said, I got lucky in the sense that I had COVID, so I got to like hang out with my friends every day. So it wasn't too bad for me. But I mean, you have to wait out for yourself and like what your goals are and what you see your future plan to be. And honestly, I think no matter what you choose, you will probably be successful regardless.
Thank you so much. And Jana, last but not least.
Yeah, so I took one gap year. There was sort of like the logistical reason of I decided to be a pre-med very late, and so I like was not a competitive applicant at that point. And I also was like going back and forth. I'm like, do I really want to do an MD? Do I just do a PhD? But I also really loved that year because it confirmed that like I really love doing research full time. And like that was something I, obviously talked about a lot in my application on the PhD side of things. And it gave me, like Lyra said, a lot, and like Dante said, a lot of time to like think about what it is, like who I am as a person, what is it that I want out of life, which, those questions always come up during the application process as well. So I had, actual answers to them at that point.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I will definitely say that a lot more people are taking gap years now than ever. So it's definitely becoming more common, and there's clearly like nothing wrong with taking a gap year. It's so important for some people. But it's very like tailored to your own background and needs, like you guys said. So just to finish it off, I want to ask one final question and kind of incorporate one of the questions in the chat. So my question is, do you guys have any last minute advice, especially for students applying during COVID, because they can't get experience in person? So advice for getting remote experience. Maybe one or two of you can talk about that, and then one or two of you can talk about just advice in general. Lyra, if you want to go first.
I was hoping I wouldn't be first because I wanted to think about it. If anyone else has something they wanted to share, maybe they can go. I'm honestly terrible at answering the COVID question because I was already in a lab at that point, so I didn't have to search for labs. Does anyone else want to answer?
I can answer the COVID question because I had to kind of scramble and figure stuff out because all my plans kind of went up in the air. So yeah, this kind of ties into the most recent question. There's like hobbies that I enjoy that made me stand out, I guess, as an applicant. So something that I did during COVID was basically Washcu Med had a student-run health clinic, and their electronic health record system was not very good and really inefficient. And so what I did, working with a couple other people that I knew, was we basically programmed something called an optical character recognition software, which sounds really intimidating, but basically all it is, you take a photo of like text and it converts it into like something that a computer can parse through. And so that is what I spent my summer, like my COVID summer, doing. And that was honestly one of the biggest things that I talked about in my application, because it was like something that I saw there was a hole in and that I could see I could fix. And like I worked with a team to fix it. So those are kind of the things that you can do. And it was completely remote. And obviously programming is easier to remote because you just beep boop on the computer for like an entire day. But those are the kind of things, just like finding like issues that are in your community or things that you see and finding ways to solve them. It doesn't always have to be specifically medicine related. That one just happened to be medicine adjacent. Like did I really improve anybody's health? No, but like that just made something slightly more efficient. So that's kind of like the advice for like COVID opportunities, or just like opportunities in general.
Kind of to add to that, so since I postponed that question, I will say this relates a little bit to COVID, but also advice in general. I think it's super important to use social media to your advantage. If you're here today, you probably are already really good at doing that. But I think for me, part of why I started my Instagram was also because I was using Instagram to look up, like what are doctors doing? What are they posting? Because that was part of me seeing, what exactly is being a physician or being a physician scientist. And even though not everybody is on social media, especially with medical careers being so intense and busy, and it's like hard to balance both. And of course it's filtered, like not everything gets posted, and there's a lot of like HIPAA limitations, so you can't share specifics about patients. I do think it's a really awesome way, because these are the people who are trying really hard to share what it's like. And I do think if you find the right accounts, there's a lot of vulnerability and honesty there as well about like the challenges in training. And I personally try to do that with my Instagram, but I also really appreciate looking at upperclassmen and seeing what they post, and like joining Instagram lives where we talk about it. Like I'm currently trying to set up an Instagram live with 3 MD PhD students at NYU who are known as Scopes and Scrubs. They have a really cool account. And I was just like, hey, why don't we set up a live and I can ask you questions about like, what's it like being in the late few years of your PhD and how I can prepare for that stage. And at the same time, I'm sure other people on my Instagram would love to see that too. And so I think it's really smart to use social media to learn about how to succeed in this process, especially if it's hard to find mentors in your like everyday day-to-day life, depending on your school, depending on like where you are in your city. So I think that's a great idea if you are ever having a hard time getting a question answered, or finding a mentor.
Awesome, thank you so much. Dante, maybe you can speak a little bit just to like general advice, maybe not so much COVID because we've kind of covered that.
Yeah, of course. I would say my biggest piece of advice is do what I mean, there are obviously limitations, but like try to do stuff that you're passionate about and stuff that you love doing, because that is what's going to come through on your application. And that is going to be what they ask you about in your interviews. And I definitely got this vibe during med school interviews, but just from being on like the other side and like having been in roles where I've been interviewing people, there is such a huge difference. And you can tell when someone is talking about an experience that they had that they were passionate about versus an experience that they had and they were like, eh. And not every experience that you do needs to be this like life-changing, incredible thing. But I feel like, especially like in talking with like my classmates here at WashU and like my friends who are at other medical schools, like a pretty consistent thing is like everyone has at least one thing that they're super passionate about. And it doesn't even have to necessarily be within medicine, but what that helps you with is then during your interviews, they will see that. And then they know this person is passionate about stuff and they're going to bring that passion to medicine. And most specifically, they're going to bring that passion to giving the best care possible to their patients, because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. So find something that you're passionate about it, do it, love it, and write about it in your application, because then they will probably spend the bulk of your interview talking about that.
Absolutely, great advice. Thank you so much. And Jana, last but not least.
Yeah, so this is going off of what Dante was saying. I think at least I felt so much pressure when I was applying to be like the perfect pre-med that, you know, had like a 528 Mcat and 4.0 and like, you know, 1,000 shadowing hours and all of these things. And like, I was sitting there like, I think I want to be a doctor at this point. I'm not 100% sure, but like, I'm going to apply and like hope for the best. And something that I found was that like, only you know like why you are going to be a good medical student and like why you would be a good physician. And so at some point I like stopped listening to all of those like, you know, pundits on like SDN and Reddit and stuff like that. I was like, I'm going to talk about my story and why I want to go to medical school. And if a school likes it, that's great. And if a school doesn't, like, then that's not a school that I would have like done well in anyway. And I think taking that pressure off of myself to be like the perfect pre-med was really helpful. And I don't think schools want that either. I don't think they want, you know, a class that's the exact same. And so taking that pressure off of yourself is really helpful to just tell your story, because you know it and you know that like you deserve to be there.
Well, I definitely can't say it better than all of you guys have said it, but you know, I just want to reiterate to everyone who's been here throughout this entire weekend, what I love about these webinars is, you know, on top of the advice they just provided, you know, if you really paid attention to their stories and their experiences, you know, hopefully if you learn one thing, you can maybe reflect on your own experiences and recognize, wow, what I did was pretty cool. You know, I'm also a pretty cool person. And if I just write that on my application and really, you know, just talk about what I'm interested in, like that is, what's going to make me stand out. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to be like Lyra, you're not going to be like Dante, you're not going to be like Jana, you're not going to be like Ahmed. You're going to be like you if you, really paid attention to what they said and you start to implement just, the characteristics that, they were able to demonstrate through their experiences. You'll be able to do the same to yours. So I just want to say thank you again for taking the time out of your afternoons and, helping on this panel. This has been one of my favorite panels. Don't tell anyone, just like, I'll go tell University of Washington for you, Ahmed. But this has been an amazing weekend. I hope to have you all back at some point for another webinar. And thank you to everyone who's, been with us this weekend. Please note that a recording of this webinar will be available on the Discord soon. And I look forward to interacting with all of you on STEM Potential and setting up additional events. Also, I'll try to get as many of the panelists' emails as possible, and we'll put that out on the Discord as well if they're comfortable with sharing. But I also want to tell everyone to follow Lyra if you haven't, because I swear to God, when I tell you that when I ran across this girl's account, it single-handedly changed my life. Not even just in a medical school sense, like actually just from a weird philosophical, I love her sense. So, do yourself a favor. If you spend any time on Instagram, follow her. All right, I'm done fangirling, I promise. Thank you everyone again. I used to say we're going to take a break now, but we're not. We're just done with the weekend. So thank you all. I hope you have a great rest of your Sunday, a great week, and I'll catch you guys, I don't know, TikTok or somewhere ridiculous where I'm wearing a periodic table. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Yeah.